The sun hung high over Paradise Beach Resort, casting golden rays across the shimmering pool where the Rivers family had sought a rare escape from their demanding lives. Alex Rivers, a seasoned FBI agent with over a decade of service, lounged on a cushioned sun chair, his broad shoulders relaxed for once beneath a pair of dark sunglasses. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore mingled with the salty breeze, a sensation he savored like a long-lost friend. For months, he dreamed of this moment, leaving behind the relentless calls, the late-night case files, the weight of lives depending on his next move. Here, in this slice of paradise, he could finally breathe. Beside him, his wife Maya, a formidable lawyer known for championing the marginalized, sat with a novel resting in her lap. Her elegant frame was draped in a flowing sundress, but her sharp eyes betrayed a mind that rarely rested. She'd been itching to finish that book for weeks, its pages a quiet rebellion against the chaos of courtrooms and clients. Their children, Jake and Sophie, splashed in the shallow end of the pool, their laughter cutting through the tranquil air like a melody. 12-year-old Jake, lanky and brimming with a quiet confidence, raced his younger sister through the water, while 7-year-old Sophie, her curly brown hair bouncing with every giggle, beamed with uncontainable joy watching them. Alex felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a fleeting peace he'd chased for years. This vacation had been a lifeline, meticulously planned over months of stolen conversations between Alex's unpredictable missions and Maya's tireless advocacy. The resort itself was a vision of luxury, palm trees swaying lazily, pristine white sand stretching toward an endless horizon, and a sky so blue it seemed painted just for them. Alex stretched out his arm, reaching for the icy drink sweating on the table beside him, the condensation cool against his fingertips. For once, the tension that clung to him like a shadow had lifted, replaced by the simple pleasure of being present. Maya glanced over with a soft smile, her fingers tracing the edges of her book, and for a moment, they shared an unspoken gratitude. This was their sanctuary. But the illusion of peace unraveled as quickly as it had settled. From the corner of his eye, Alex spotted a figure approaching, a security guard. His dark polo shirt stretched taut over a broad chest, his stride deliberate and heavy with purpose. The man's face was a mask of professionalism, but his eyes glinted with something colder, something wary. Alex's instincts, honed by years of reading people, prickled alive. He sat up slowly, lowering his sunglasses to meet the guard's gaze as the man stopped in front of their chairs. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, his voice clipped and edged with authority. "I need to verify that you're a guest here." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the calm. Alex tilted his head, his tone steady as he replied, "I'm a guest here." He paused, letting the statement hang before adding, "We're in room 986, arrived yesterday." Maya set her book down with a quiet thud, her posture stiffening as she sensed the shift in the air. She'd felt this before, a weight of scrutiny, the sting of being singled out. It wasn't new, but it never grew easier. Her eyes darted to Alex, searching his face for a signal, though she already knew what this was. The guard's lips twitched into a smirk, a hollow gesture that never reached his eyes. "It's just procedure," he said, his tone flat. "I'll need to confirm with the front desk. Hope you understand." Maya straightened, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Is there a problem?" she asked, polite but unyielding. The guard faltered for a split second, his composure flickering. "No problem, ma'am, just routine." Alex sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. He'd navigated these moments too many times upscale places, where his family's presence seemed to unsettle the unspoken order. "Let them check," he murmured to Maya, his hand brushing her arm. She nodded, but her jaw tightened, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. Even here, on a day meant for joy, they couldn't escape the shadow of suspicion. As the guard turned and strode back toward the resort's main building, Alex tried to reclaim the calm he'd felt moments before. He leaned back, forcing a smile for Jake and Sophie, who were still oblivious, their laughter a distant echo of the happiness he'd clung to. But Maya couldn't let it go. She stared after the guard, her book forgotten, her fingers curling into fists. "This was supposed to be our time," she whispered, more to herself than to Alex. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, but the gesture felt hollow against the unease settling over them. The air had thickened, the carefree lightness replaced by a gnawing tension. They both recognized too well. Minutes later, the guard returned, this time flanked by a colleaguely taller man with a stern jaw and an air of quiet menace. Their footsteps were brisk, their expressions carved from stone, and the last traces of politeness had vanished. "Sir," the first guard began, his voice louder now, laced with a certainty that set Alex's nerves on edge. "We need you and your family to leave the pool area until we confirm your information with the front desk." Alex rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes locked on the guard. "As I said, we're in room 986. Call the front desk if you need to. There's no reason to make us leave." His voice remained even, but inside, a slow burn of anger flickered to life. He'd spent years upholding justice, facing down criminals with more guts than these men. And yet here he was, reduced to defending his right to sit by a pool. Maya was on her feet now, her patience fraying. "I don't understand," she said, her tone rising with every word. "We've answered your questions. Why are you asking us to leave?" The guard avoided her gaze, focusing on Alex as if she hadn't spoken. "We've had issues with non-guests sneaking into the pool area," he said, his words mechanical. "This is just procedure to protect the resort." Maya's eyes narrowed, her lawyer's mind slicing through the excuse. "What's the real issue here?" she pressed, stepping closer. "We've given you our room number. You're still questioning us. Is it because we don't look like the other guests? Does your policy apply to everyone, or just families like ours?" Her voice trembled with a mix of fury and exhaustion, the weight of every past encounter crashing into this one. The guard shifted uncomfortably, his facade cracking under her scrutiny. "Ma'am, it's not what you think. We're just ensuring security." But his words rang hollow, and Alex could see the lie in them. He placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, feeling the storm raging within here, a storm he shared. "It's okay," he said softly, though it wasn't. "Let them check." But before the situation could settle, the second guard stepped forward, younger and brasher, his arms crossed defiantly. "We've had a lot of people sneaking in who don't belong," he said, his tone dripping with challenge. "Don't think we're targeting you. This is just our job." That was the spark that ignited Maya's restraint. She moved in front of him, her presence commanding despite her smaller stature. "Not personal," she snapped, her voice a whip crack. "Then why are we the only ones being questioned? Why are my children watching this instead of swimming?" Her eyes blazed, and Alex felt the same fire clawing at his chest. He stepped beside her, his calm facade slipping as the younger guard squared his shoulders. The tension coiled tighter, a standoff brewing under the relentless sun. Unbeknownst to the guards, they'd crossed a line with the wrong man. Alex's FBI badge sat tucked in his bag, a silent testament to the authority they'd underestimated. As the confrontation escalated, a small crowd of guests began to gather, whispering among themselves. Among them was a resort housekeeper, Maria, a weary woman with tired eyes and a habit of noticing everything. She'd seen the Rivers family check in, their warmth and laughter a stark contrast to the usual aloof clientele. Now, watching the guards' aggression, her stomach twisted with a mix of anger and helplessness. She'd seen this play out before with others who didn't fit the mold. The first guard, sensing the growing scrutiny, reached for his radio, muttering a request for backup. Moments later, two police officers arrived, their uniforms crisp and their faces hard. Without a word, they grabbed Alex's arms, wrenching them behind his back as the cold bite of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Maya's shout pierced the air. "What are you doing?" as Jake and Sophie froze in the pool, their joy replaced by wide-eyed fear. Alex's mind raced, his training kicking in even as his heart pounded with outrage. "I'm an FBI agent," he said, his voice low and firm. "Check my ID. It's in my bag." The officers paused, exchanging glances, but the damage was done. The crowd murmured louder, phones emerging to capture the scene, and Maria slipped away to alert the manager, her hands trembling with the weight of what she'd witnessed. When the truth broke, with badge gleaming under the sunlight, As an officer pulled it from Alex's bag, the guards' faces drained of color. The officers fumbled to remove the cuffs, stammering apologies. But the Rivers family stood in the wreckage of their vacation. Maya's glare could have shattered glass, her arms wrapped protectively round Jake and Sophie, who clung to her with tear-streaked faces. Alex, free now, rubbed his wrists, his silence more menacing than any words. The lesson hung heavy over the resort. Justice, when twisted by prejudice and power, cuts deeper than any blade. And for those who wield authority without care, the consequences can unravel everything they thought they controlled. The sun hung lazily over the shimmering pool, its golden rays bouncing off the water, casting playful reflections on the faces of the guests lounging nearby. Just moments ago, the air had been filled with the carefree laughter of children and the gentle hum of relaxed conversation. Now, that tranquility was shattered, replaced by a suffocating tension that pressed down on everyone within earshot. Maya Rivers stood at the center of it all, her posture rigid, her sharp voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "You're pushing us so hard, you're scaring my children and insulting us over some flimsy procedure. You're using as a shield." Her words weren't just spoken, they were hurled, fueled by a fire blazing deep within her chest. Her dark eyes, usually warm and calculating from years in the courtroom, now flickered with unrestrained fury as she glared at the two security guards standing before her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming urge to protect her family, a primal instinct that surged through her veins. Beside her, Alex Rivers felt the situation slipping through his fingers like sand. He stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared, his voice steady but carrying a sharper edge than before. "We've answered every single question you've thrown at us. If you need verification, pick up the phone and call the front desk. There's no reason for this to spiral any further." His tone was calm, a deliberate anchor in the storm brewing around them, but his hazel eyes betrayed him. They simmered with frustration, the kind that builds slowly, brick by brick, until it threatens to topple over. He wasn't just a husband or a father in that moment. He was an FBI agent, trained to read people, to diffuse chaos, and he could see the guards weren't interested in reason. They were drunk on their little slice of power, and it made his stomach twist. The younger guard, a weary man with a patchy beard and a smug tilt to his lips, let out a low chuckle. His smirk wasn't friendly, it was a taunt, a jab meant to provoke. "We're just doing our job, Mom," he said, dragging out the word mom with a mocking lilt as he shrugged his bony shoulders. "If you've got a problem, take it up with our manager." His casual dismissal hung in the air, a spark tossed carelessly onto dry tinder. Maya's gaze locked onto him, her jaw tightening so hard it ached. She was no stranger to confrontation. Years as a lawyer had honed her into a force of nature, unflinching before judges and juries, but this was different. This wasn't a courtroom where she could wield precedent and logic like weapons. This was personal. She wasn't defending a client, she was shielding her husband, her children, her very heart. Her chest heaved as she fought the urge to lunge forward, to wipe that infuriating smirk off his face. Before she could fire back, Alex's hand found her arm, his touch gentle but firm, pulling her back from the edge. He turned to the guard, his voice unwavering. "You've asked for our room number, and we've given it to you, 986. We're not going anywhere. Check with the front desk if you need to. But I won't stand here and let you harass my family any longer." His words were measured, but beneath them simmered a quiet fury, a warning coiled tight like a spring. He glanced over at his children, Jake and Sophie, who had been splashing in the shallow end of the pool just minutes ago, their giggles echoing through the warm air. Now they stood frozen, their small bodies pressed close together, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Jake, the older of the two at 8, took a tentative step toward his father, his brow furrowed. "Dad, what's going on?" His voice was small, trembling, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy he'd had earlier. Alex knelt down, resting a steady hand on his son's shoulder, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nothing, buddy, just a little mix-up. Go back and play with Sophie, I've got this." His tone was soft, reassuring, but inside, his mind raced. He could feel the situation teetering on a knife's edge, one wrong move away from erupting into something far uglier. He straightened up, his gaze flicking back to the guards. The older one, a stocky man with thinning hair and a nervous twitch in his jaw, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the growing crowd of onlookers. Guests lounging by the pool had begun to notice the commotion, their heads turning, whispers rippling through the air like a breeze stirring leaves. A few had even pulled out their phones, their screens glinting as they recorded the unfolding drama. Yet none stepped forward to intervene. They were spectators to a spectacle, content to watch from the safety of their sun chairs. "All right, I'll check with the front desk right now," the older guard muttered, his attempt at professionalism faltering as his voice cracked slightly. "Please, just wait here." He turned away, fumbling with his radio, clearly rattled by the mounting pressure. Alex exhaled heavily, his broad chest rising and falling as he fought to keep his composure. Exhaustion gnawed at him. Had dealt with worse in his years with the FBI, but this was his family, his sanctuary, and it made every nerve in his body scream. Maya, though, wasn't ready to let it go. Her piercing eyes tracked the guard's every move, her mind already cataloging every word, every gesture, preparing for the fight she knew was coming. She wasn't just angry, she was a lioness, poised to defend her cubs, and she wouldn't let these petty tyrants trample over her dignity. The fragile calm shattered minutes later when the guards returned, this time flanked by 2 local police officers. The officers marched across the pool deck with purposeful strides, their boots thudding against the tiles, their stern faces carved from stone. The relaxed hum of the poolside evaporated, replaced by a palpable unease that settled over the guests like a fog. People stopped mid-conversation, their drinks forgotten, as they turned to watch the approaching entourage. Some whispered nervously, others craned their necks for a better view, their phones still rolling, capturing every second of the escalating tension. A tall officer, his frame towering over the others, stepped forward, his deep voice slicing through the air. "We received a report of an incident here. I need to see your identification." His tone was clipped, authoritative, leaving no room for negotiation. Alex felt a surge of anger flare in his chest, hot and unrelenting, but he rose to his feet slowly, his movements deliberate, his face a mask of calm. "I've already explained to the security guards me family and I are legitimate guests here, staying in room 986. I'm Alex Rivers, an FBI agent, and we've done nothing wrong." His voice was clear, steady, a quiet assertion of truth. He'd faced down armed suspects and navigated high-stakes standoffs, but this petty power play in front of his wife and kids lit a fire in him he struggled to contain. The officer barely blinked at the mention of Alex's credentials. Instead, he cut in sharply. "Hand over your ID, now." Maya shot to her feet beside him, her fury erupting like a volcano. "My husband just told you he's an FBI agent. You have no grounds to treat us like this, like we're criminals, suspiciously not in front of our children." Her voice rang with the authority of someone who'd spent years commanding courtrooms, her words dripping with indignation. She gestured toward Jake and Sophie, who clung to each other near the pool's edge, their small faces pale, their innocence tainted by the ugliness unfolding before them. The officer didn't even glance her way, his cold eyes fixed solely on Alex, his hand hovering near the handcuffs on his belt. "ID, now, or we'll follow protocol." Alex's jaw tightened, his mind racing through the scenarios he'd seen play out too many times in his career situations, where pride and power collided, leaving destruction in their wake. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and slid his FBI badge and ID into the officer's outstretched hand. "Here's my ID," he said, his voice firm but laced with a quiet defiance. The officer snatched it, inspecting it for a fleeting moment before tossing it back with a sneer. "I don't care about this badge. Could be from a gift shop for all I know. Give me real identification." Maya's breath hitched, her fists clenching so tightly her knuckles whitened. "What did you just say?" she snapped, her voice rising, sharp enough to draw blood. Alex's hand found her shoulder again, his touch a silent plea. "Stay calm, Maya," he murmured, though his own anger churned beneath the surface, a storm barely contained. The officer's gaze hardened, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "I won't ask again. Valid ID, or we take further action." Alex knew the Gamethy were baiting him, testing how far they could push before he broke. With a slow, deliberate motion, he handed over his driver's license, his tone icing over. "Here's your valid ID." The officer took it, gave it a cursory glance, then flicked it back at Alex with a dismissive toss. "We still haven't gotten confirmation from the hotel. Until we do, you and your family need to leave this area." That was the breaking point for Maya. She stepped forward, her voice a whipcrack of defiance. "Enough, we're guests here, and we're not moving an inch. If you keep harassing us, I'll make sure you face the consequences. What you're doing is illegal, and I'll drag this into the light for everyone to see." The officer stood motionless, his eyes glinting with a dangerous mix of arrogance and challenge. "Who do you think you are, threatening us?" Maya drew herself up to her full height, unflinching. "I'm a lawyer, and my husband's a federal agent. You've made a colossal mistake treating us like this, and I promise you, this won't be swept under the rug." The air around the pool grew heavy, the tension so thick it felt like it could snap at any moment. Guests murmured among themselves, their whispers a rising tide, while the glow of phone screens multiplied, documenting every word, every gesture. Alex glanced at Maya, his heart pounding not just with anger, but with a gnawing fear for what might come next. They were caught in a web of petty tyranny, and he knew one misstep could unravel everything. Then the younger officer, one with the cuff, stepped forward, his movements brash, his eyes alight with eagerness. "Put your hands behind your back, or we'll use force," he barked, snapping the handcuffs open with a metallic clink. Alex didn't flinch, his gaze locking onto the officers, steady and unyielding. "You're making a big mistake," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs around them. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise, born from years of witnessing justice twisted by those too small to wield it. He stood there, tall and resolute, the sun casting long shadows behind him as the officer advanced, cuffs gleaming in the afternoon light. In that frozen moment, the lesson hung heavy. Power, when abused, doesn't just provoke, it corrodes, leaving scars on those it touches and exposing the frailty of those who wield it. For Alex and Maya, it was a fight for dignity, a stand against the petty gods of authority who forgot that justice isn't a privilege to be dangled, but a right to be defended. And as the crowd watched, phones in hand, the ripples of this clash stretched far beyond the poolside, a stark reminder that consequences come for everyone, especially those who mistake might for right. The memories crashed over Alex like a relentless torrent, a flood of the past that refused to be held back, drowning his thoughts in vivid, inescapable waves. He stood there, a man who had once been a rookie FBI agent, thrust into a world of peril and precision, where every heartbeat had been a test of courage. Those early days had forged him confronting ruthless criminals, outsmarting drug lords who peddled despair, and dismantling the plans of domestic terrorists who sought to fracture the nation. He swore to protect. His mind had always been his sharpest weapon, honed through tense standoffs and sleepless nights. But now, in this moment, it felt dulled, powerless. All those years of service, every sacrifice made in the name of national security, seemed to crumble into dust when measured against the crushing injustice his family now faced. A memory clawed its way to the surface, sharp and unyielding, from 5 years earlier. Alex had been the lead investigator on a case that still haunted him, a police shooting, an unarmed black teenager gunned down in a quiet neighborhood street. He could still feel the weight of that investigation, the endless hours poring over grainy footage, the stacks of witness statements that painted a grim picture, the cold realization that what had happened wasn't a tragic error, but a deliberate abuse of power, woven into the very fabric of the system. Back then, he had interviewed grieving mothers with trembling hands, neighbors too afraid to speak above whispers, and officers whose stony silence screamed complicity. He had fought tooth and nail to expose the truth, to bring some semblance of justice to a boy whose life had been snuffed out unjustly. That fight had fueled him, given him purpose, a belief that he could chip away at the rot. But now, staring into the abyss of his own predicament, he felt the bitter irony twist like a knife had become the hunted, ensnared by the same system he'd once battled to reform. His gaze drifted to Maya, his wife, standing a few feet away, her posture rigid with a defiance born of years fighting in courtrooms for the voiceless. She had always been a fork and shikable, a beacon of strength for the underprivileged she defended with every fiber of her being. Her pride in her work had been a quiet fire, one that warmed their home and steadied their family through storms. But today, that fire blazed differently. She wasn't the poised attorney crafting arguments to shield a client. She was a wife, a mother, her eyes flashing with a fury that mirrored the storm raging in Alex's chest. It tore at him to see her like this, forced to protect him, to shield their children from a nightmare no family should endure. The thought of Maya bearing this burden gnawed at him, a deeper wound than any he'd ever taken in the field. The young officer before him raised the handcuffs, the glint of metal catching the sunlight, and Alex's mind spiraled back to the countless arrests he'd made in his career. He could still feel the adrenaline of those moments spinning a cartel enforcer to the ground. As sirens wailed, cuffing a bomber whose hands still reeked of gasoline. Each time, he'd acted with purpose, knowing he was removing threats from the streets. But now, that same cold steel hovered over his own wrists, not because of a crime, but because of how he looked, because suspicion clung to his skin like a shadow he couldn't shake. The absurdity of it burned in his throat, a bitter taste he couldn't swallow. Another memory surged forward. Ron Tenderth Day and Maya had sat their son Jake down to explain the world's harsh edges. Jake had been 10, his wide eyes still bright with innocence, yet shadowed by confusion. "Why do they keep looking at us like that?" he'd asked, his small voice trembling as he recounted the stares, the whispers, the way people clutched their bags tighter when the family walked by. Alex had knelt before him, searching for words simple enough to soften the truth. But his heart had ached with every syllable. He'd wanted to shield Jake, to promise him a world that judged him by his character, not his color. But the lie wouldn't come. He'd settled for honesty instead, his voice steady, but his soul heavy, knowing he couldn't protect his son forever. Now, years later, Jake stood nearby, taller but still that same boy at heart, his face a mask of bewilderment and quiet pain as he watched his father's humiliation unfold. Sophie, their younger daughter, clung to Maya's side, her small hands gripping her mother's skirt as if it were a lifeline. Tears welled in her eyes, glistening like shards of glass, and her soft whimpers pierced Alex more sharply than any bullet ever could. He felt his chest tighten, a vice of anguish squeezing the air from his lungs. His children, his brave, beautiful children, should never have to see this, their father reduced to a suspect, their family torn apart by prejudice masquerading as protocol. He caught their gazes, forcing a gentle look despite the inferno blazing within him, a silent promise that he'd hold it together for them. In that moment, Alex's thoughts drifted to his black colleagues at the FBI and women he'd shared coffee with, traded war stories with, relied on in the field. Their voices echoed in his mind, recounting casual cruelties, being pulled over in their own neighborhoods because their cars didn't fit, enduring suspicious glares in stores where they shopped with hard-earned money. He'd listened, nodded, vowed to be part of the change. His work had been his weapon, his badge's shield against the tide of inequity. But now, that shield lay shattered, and he stood exposed, a target of the very forces he'd sought to dismantle. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, willing his racing pulse to calm. He'd faced worse standoffs with armed fugitives, raids where death lingered in every shadow, but nothing had ever wounded him like this. The pain wasn't in his body, it was in his soul, a deep, throbbing ache that whispered of betrayal. He knew resistance would only escalate things, painting a bigger target on his family's back. The young officer, oblivious to the tempest swirling in Alex's mind, stared at him with a glint of defiance, almost daring him to fight back, to give an excuse for force. Alex met his gaze, steady and unyielding, and spoke softly. "All right." He placed his hands behind his back, not in surrender, but in a calculated choice to protect those he loved. The cuffs clicked shut, their icy bite sinking into his skin, and Sophie's choked sobs filled the air, each one a dagger to his heart. Jake stood frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes a storm of hurt and questions Alex couldn't yet answer. Inside, fury roared like wildfire, but Alex tamped it down, channeling it into a vow. This wasn't over. He'd endure today for his family's sake, but tomorrow, he'd fight not with fists, but with the weight of his experience, his resolve, his unshakable belief in justice. The system might bend under the misuse of power, but he'd seen it crack before, and he'd be damned if he let it break his spirit. Across from him, Maya snapped. The sight of those cuffs on her husband's man who'd stared down killers without flinching, now treated like a petty thug, ignited something primal in her. A jolt of rage coursed through her veins, waking every dormant ember of anger she'd buried beneath years of courtroom composure. She'd held her tongue too long, bitten back too many retorts, but no more. With a stride fueled by righteous fury, she closed the distance to the officer, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "That's enough," she bellowed, the sound reverberating across the poolside, where onlookers froze, their phones still rolling, capturing every second. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you even realize you're cuffing a federal agent?" The young officer, his hands still on the cuffs, looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and bravado. "Ma'am, if you don't step back, we'll have to detain you too," he warned, his tone clipped, as if her outrage were a mere inconvenience. But Maya didn't flinch, stepped closer, her presence a wall of defiance. "Detain me," she spat, her voice dripping with scorn. "You've got no right to touch me for defending my family. You're treating my husband like a criminal in front of our kids, and I'll be damned if I let this slide." The older officer, who'd watched the scene unfold with a detached chill, moved to intercept her, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," he said, his voice flat, mechanical. "Your husband didn't comply with our requests." Maya's laugh was sharp, brittle, a sound that carried the weight of every injustice she'd ever fought. "Doing your job," she shot back, her words rising like a crescendo. "Is your job to harass a law-abiding family? To arrest an innocent man because of his skin? I'm a lawyer, know our rights. The second you touched him without cause, you broke the law." The older officer's eyes flickered, a nervous dart toward the growing crowd. Guests at the poolside had abandoned their whispers for open filming, their murmurs of disapproval swelling into a low hum. He sensed the tide shifting. This could spiral, hit the internet, become a firestorm. But the younger officer, brash and unyielding, dug in his heels. "We asked for ID. He didn't comply fast enough. That's all we need," he said, his stance rigid, oblivious to the storm he'd ignited. Maya's restraint shattered. She leaned in, her voice a low, fierce growl. "You'll see what justice looks like when I'm done with you. Round them." The air crackled with tension, a lesson unfolding in real time. Power, unchecked, breeds consequence, and justice, though delayed, would not be silenced. On a bustling street corner, beneath the weight of a gray March sky, Maya planted herself squarely in front of the young officer, her stance unwavering, her breath steady despite the storm raging within her. Her dark eyes bore into his with a ferocity that carried no hint of fear, only a mother's unrelenting determination and a wife's righteous fury. "I told you loudly, clearly, more than once that my husband is a federal agent," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathering crowd like a blade through silk. "You didn't just ignore me, you trampled over the law you're supposed to uphold, dragged our dignity through the mud, and left my children trembling in the aftermath of your arrogance. Do you even grasp what you've done?" Her words weren't just an accusation, they were a declaration of war against the injustice that had unfolded before her eyes. Nearby, her son Jake stood rooted to the pavement, his small frame dwarfed by the chaos swirling around him. His wide, hazel eyes darted from his mother's fierce silhouette to the rigid posture of the officers, then back to his father, Alex, whose wrists were still bound in cold steel. Confusion churned in his chest, a tangle of emotions he couldn't yet name. At 11 years old, Jake had always seen his father as a towering figure, a federal agent, a protector, a man who commanded respect. Now, that image was fracturing. Why was his hero shackled like a thief? Why did these men in uniforms, who were supposed to be the good guys, treat his dad like he was nothing? The questions gnawed at him, and beneath them simmered a quiet, unfamiliar fear. If this could happen once, what stopped it from happening again? Behind Jake, his little sister Sophie pressed herself close, her tiny hands clutching the fabric of his jacket as if it were a lifeline. Tears streaked her round cheeks, glistening in the dim light, and her soft sobs were barely audible over the growing hum of the crowd. At 7, Sophie's world had been simple until this moment, a place where her parents were invincible, where safety was a given. Now, that illusion lay shattered. She peeked out from behind her brother, her gaze flickering toward her father, then quickly away, as if looking too long might make the nightmare real. Her small body trembled, not just from the chill in the air, but from the terror of seeing her daddy, her gentle, unshakable dad, reduced to a figure of humiliation. Maya's chest tightened as she caught the flicker of her daughter's tearful eyes and the slump of her son's shoulders. Her anger, which had ignited the moment the cuffs snapped onto Alex's wrists, wasn't just for her husband anymore. It was for the Miek and Sophie, innocent souls forced to witness this travesty. No child should have to watch their father stripped of his freedom for no reason other than the color of his skin. No child should have to grow up haunted by the dread that their family could be torn apart at the whim of a badge. That realization fueled her, turning her voice into a force of nature as she faced the young officer again. "You think I'll just stand here quietly while you treat my husband like a criminal?" she demanded, her tone rising with every syllable, resonating with a strength that seemed to draw the crowd closer. "You think I let my children carry this shame, this fear, without a fight? I will drag this into the light, every second of it, and you will answer for what you've unleashed here today." The onlookers, a mix of locals and tourists, pressed in tighter, their whispers swelling into a chorus of unease. Cell phones rose like torches in the dusk, capturing the scene as voices broke free from hushed tones into bold declarations. "This isn't right," a woman muttered, her brow furrowed as she filmed. "They can't just do this," a man beside her added, his voice thick with disbelief. The air crackled with their shared outrage, and Maya felt a tide shifting, the weight of their support bolstering her resolve. She stood taller, her presence commanding, as if she were channeling the collective anger of every person who'd ever been wronged by unchecked power. The young officer, barely out of his 20s, shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. His uniform, once a shield of authority, now felt like a flimsy disguise. He'd started this encounter with a cocky swagger, convinced of his control, but now his confidence wavered. His hands twitched at his sides, and his eyes darted toward his partner, an older man with graying temples and a weathered face that betrayed a flicker of worry. The senior officer scanned the crowd, noting the phones, the murmurs, the disapproving stares. He knew the math: one viral video, a few hours online, and this could spiral beyond containment. Turning back to Alex, still cuffed but eerily composed, he felt the first pang of regret. Alex's calm wasn't weakness, it was the quiet strength of a man who'd seen worse, who knew the storm would pass, but not without leaving scars. "I suggest you calm down, ma'am," the young officer tried, his voice thinner now, stripped of its earlier bravado, "or we'll have to take further action." It was a hollow threat, and Maya saw through it instantly. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing, her posture unyielding. "I am calm," she said, each word deliberate, sharp as a whip. "But if you don't take those cuffs off my husband right now, I'll make sure this becomes the nightmare you can't wake up from." Time seemed to halt. The crowd fell silent, breaths held, eyes locked on the standoff. The young officer's bravado crumbled under her stare, while the older one's unease deepened, lines etching deeper into his forehead. Sensing the tipping point, the senior officer turned to his team, his voice low but firm. "That's enough. Let him go." The younger man hesitated, his pride warring with the order, but after a tense beat, he fumbled for the key. The cuffs clicked open, and Alex flexed his wrists, rubbing the red marks left behind. His face remained steady, but Maya knew him too well. Beneath that calm exterior, a fire smoldered, fueled by the indignity he'd endured and the pain it had inflicted on his family. As the metal clattered to the ground, a collective exhale rippled through Jake and Sophie. Though their relief was fleeting, confusion lingered in their eyes, a shadow neither parent could dispel. Jake shuffled toward his father, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions, "why did they do that?" "You didn't do anything wrong." His fists clenched, tiny knuckles whitening as he fought to hold back tears. Alex knelt, meeting his son's gaze, his heart twisting at the betrayal mirrored there. "Sometimes people see what they want to see, not what's true," he said softly, resting a steady hand on Jake's shoulder. They make mistakes, big ones, because they're scared or blind. But we don't let that change who we are. I'm okay, and we'll make sure they face what they've done." Jake nodded, but his eyes dropped to the ground, his mind still wrestling with the fracture in his world. Maya turned to Sophie, who clung to her leg, her sobs quieter now but no less heartrending. "Mommy, is Daddy okay? Did they hurt him?" Her voice was a fragile thread, woven with fear. Maya sank to her knees, wrapping her daughter in a fierce embrace, her fingers threading through Sophie's curls. "Daddy's fine, baby," she whispered, forcing gentleness into her tone despite the fury still simmering within. "We're all going to be okay together." But as Sophie's trembling frame pressed against her, Maya felt the ache of knowing this moment would linger in her daughter's memory. A wound no hug could fully heal. Alex rose, his gaze shifting to the officers. "Get ready," he said, his voice low but resolute, "because you'll answer for every second of this." Maya joined him, her eyes still locked on the young officer, now visibly shaken. "What you've done is unforgivable," she added, her tone no longer a shout but a promise carved in stone. "We won't stop until justice is served, not just for us, but for everyone who's suffered like this." The older officer stood mute, his head bowed, the weight of his silence heavier than any excuse he could muster. He'd seen the line crossed, felt the consequences looming, and knew no apology could erase the damage. The crowd lingered, some still filming, others whispering condolences or outrage. A woman with a stroller paused, her eyes soft with sympathy as she murmured to her husband, "That could have been us." A teenage boy, earbuds dangling, shook his head and typed furiously on his phone, already drafting a post to share the story. The air hung heavy with exhaustion and unresolved tension, but beneath it ran a current of truth. Power abused reaps a bitter harvest. For Maya and Alex, this wasn't just a personal battle, it was a lesson etched in their children's tear-streaked faces, a call to fight for a world where justice wasn't a privilege, but a right. The air hung thick with tension, the faint hum of distant voices and the rustling of palm trees around the resort pool, barely audible over the pounding in Alex's ears. The sting of injustice burned deep within him, a smoldering ember that refused to fade even as the metal cuffs were finally removed from his wrists. His hands, now free, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the fury he fought to contain. He stood there, his broad shoulders squared, his dark eyes locked on the young officer who had fastened those cuffs around him. Without a second thought, that officer, barely out of his 20s, shifted uncomfortably under Alex's unrelenting gaze, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his uniform as if he could somehow undo the moment that had spiraled so wildly out of control. Alex didn't speak, not yet. His silence was heavier than any words could have been, a quiet storm brewing behind his calm exterior. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about his family, his children, and every soul who'd ever felt the cold grip of power misused against them. Nearby, Jake and Sophie lingered close to their mother, their small figures dwarfed by the chaos unfolding around them. At 10 and 8 years old, they were too young to grasp the full weight of what had happened, yet old enough to sense the raw unfairness that had crashed into their lives like a rogue wave. Jake's wide, brown eyes darted between his father and the officers, his brow furrowed as he clutched the damp towel he'd been using at the pool, just moments before everything went wrong. Sophie, her ponytail still dripping with chlorinated water, pressed herself against Maya's side, her lower lip quivering as she tried to make sense of why their perfect vacation day had shattered so abruptly. The memory of their father being forced to his knees, hands bound in front of them, would cling to them like a shadow, its edges sharp and unforgiving, destined to shape the way they'd see the world for years to come. They didn't understand the legal terms or the systemic flaws at play, but they felt the ache of it all, a wound too fresh and too deep to name. Maya, standing tall despite the exhaustion tugging at her bones, was a force of nature in that moment. Her dark hair framed a face etched with determination, her eyes blazing with a fire that could have lit the entire resort ablaze. She turned to Alex, her voice low but steady, cutting through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. "We're not done here," she whispered, her words laced with an unshakable resolve. "We'll take this as far as it needs to go." Her gaze met his, and in that shared look, Alex saw the same unbreakable spirit mirrored back at him. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, his own eyes reflecting the quiet strength that had carried him through years as an FBI agent. "We won't stop," he replied, his voice a soft rumble, grounded in the certainty that this fight was bigger than just them. The older officer, a grizzled man with graying hair and a weathered face, stepped forward, his posture stiff as he tried to regain some semblance of control over the situation. His name tag read SKT Daniels, and though his tone softened from the barking commands he'd issued earlier, there was still a trace of unease in his eyes. "Ma'am," he began, addressing Maya with a cautious deference, "I understand this has been upsetting. We'll be looking into this internally, I assure you. If we can all just take a step back and cooperate, we can sort this out peacefully." His words were meant to soothe, to smooth over the jagged edges of what had happened. But they fell flat, hollowed out by the reality of the scene before him. The crowd of onlookers and staffaliques still lingered near the pool, their phones raised like tiny beacons, capturing every second of the confrontation. Daniels glanced at them, his jaw tightening as he realized the weight of those recordings, the way they'd ripple far beyond this sun-soaked afternoon. Maya's response was immediate, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Peace," she said, her tone icy with contempt. "There's no peace after what your officers did to my family. You humiliated us, traumatized my children, and crossed a line you can't uncross. This isn't something you can sweep away with an investigation you control. We're taking this to court, and I'll make sure the world knows exactly what happened here." Her eyes bore into Daniels, unflinching, as she pulled her phone from her pocket with a swift, decisive motion. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her steps quickening as she paced near the edge of the pool, the water's surface rippling faintly in the late afternoon breeze. "Ella," she said when the call connected, her voice firm and unshaken, "it's Maya. I need you to start pulling everything together for a case right now. We were just harassed by police at the resort. No warrant, no reason. Alex was handcuffed in front of our kids. We're suing the department and the resort. Get the groundwork started." On the other end of the line, Elamiah's colleague at the law firm listened intently, her sharp mind already racing through the steps ahead. A seasoned attorney with a reputation for taking on Goliath-sized cases of discrimination and abuse. Ella had seen her share of battles, but the tremor in Maya's voice told her this one was personal. She scribbled notes furiously, her desk cluttered with legal pads and coffee mugs, the faint hum of her office a stark contrast to the chaos Maya described. "I'm on it," Ella replied, her tone clipped and efficient. "I'll dig into precedents and start drafting. Stay safe, Maya. We'll hit them hard." The call ended, and Maya turned back to Daniels, her expression a fortress of resolve. "You can prepare yourself for a very public lawsuit," she told him, her words carrying the weight of a promise. "Everything that happened here is on record, and justice will be served." Daniel's face betrayed a flicker of worry as he glanced at the crowd again, their phones still rolling, their whispers growing louder. He knew Maya wasn't bluffing. This wasn't some fleeting outburst, this was a reckoning, one that could unravel careers and reputations if it wasn't handled with care. The young officer beside him, the one who'd cuffed Alex, shrank back slightly, his earlier bravado replaced by a dawning realization of the consequences. His actions had set in motion. He'd acted on impulse, fueled by assumptions and unchecked authority, and now the fallout loomed larger than he'd ever imagined. Alex, though free from the cuffs, felt their phantom weight lingering on his wrists. He stepped closer to Daniels, his voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said, his eyes narrowing as he met the sergeant's gaze. "This is for everyone who's ever been targeted, harassed, or silenced because of people like you who think power gives you the right to do whatever you want. You don't get to bury this." Daniels shifted his weight, his composure faltering as he muttered something about reporting it up the chain and launching an internal review. But to Alex, those words were nothing more than a flimsy shield, a desperate attempt to dodge the accountability hurtling toward them. Maya, her focus unbroken, strode toward the hotel's reception desk, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. The receptionist, a young woman with wide eyes and a nervous smile, fumbled with the phone as Maya approached. "We need to speak to the managerno," Maya said, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. The receptionist nodded quickly, her fingers trembling as she dialed an extension. Within minutes, a middle-aged man emerged from a back office, his suit slightly rumpled, his face creased with worry. "I'm the manager," he said, offering a slight bow to Maya and Alex. "I'm so sorry for any misunderstanding." Maya cut him off, her voice rising with controlled fury. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was discrimination, plain and simple. "You called the police on us without cause, and you're just as responsible for what happened to my family. I want to know what policy of yours justifies treating us like criminals," the manager stammered, his hands gesturing vaguely as he struggled to find words under the heat of her stare. And the growing crowd behind her. "We'll review everything, I promise," he managed. "We don't want this to happen again." But Maya shook her head, unmoved. "Promises won't cut it. We're filing a lawsuit against this resort, and you'll answer for it in court. What happened to us won't be forgotten." Just then, the hotel doors swung open with a rush of warm air, and a group of figures stepped inside. Leading them was Captain Adams, his police uniform crisp, his stride purposeful, his face stern and unreadable. Was one Alex recognized from countless press conferences, a man who wielded authority like a blade. Adams surveyed the scene, the young officers standing rigid, the manager shrinking under Maya's glare, and Alex, his posture calm but unyielding. "I'm Captain Adams," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "I've been briefed, and I want the full story now." His eyes landed on Alex, and a flicker of recognition passed between them. He knew who Alex was, an FBI agent, a man who wouldn't let this die quietly. Alex stepped forward, meeting Adams' gaze head-on. "I'm Alex Rivers," he said, his tone even but firm. "My family was harassed by your officers for no reason. I was handcuffed in front of my wife and kids, legitimate guests here, based on nothing but bias. I want answers, and I want accountability." Adams listened, his expression unchanging, though the gravity of Alex's words settled over him like a storm cloud. He turned to Daniels, his voice sharp. "Is this true?" Daniels nodded, his shoulders slumping as he recounted the events, his younger colleague shrinking further into the background. The scene was a tableau of reckoning off justice demanded and consequences looming. For Alex and Maya, this wasn't just about righting a wrong done to them. It was about exposing the rod of power abused, about ensuring no one else would suffer under its weight. The crowd's recordings would carry their story beyond these walls, a clarion call that justice, though hard-won, could not be denied. And as the sun dipped lower over the resort, casting long shadows across the pool, the lesson was clear. Those who wield power recklessly will one day face its fall. The air around the poolside was thick with tension, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel heavier. Captain Adams stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a blade. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his tone sharp and unyielding, leaving no space for half-truths or evasions. The older officer before him shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands fidgeting at his sides as he struggled to hold onto the last threads of his dignity. "Deputy Chief," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "we were just following protocol. Mr. Rivers's information couldn't be verified right away, and we didn't mean to cause any harm or disrespect." His words hung in the air, fragile and unconvincing, as if he knew they wouldn't withstand the storm brewing in the captain's eyes. Before the officer could stumble through another excuse, Captain Adams cut him off, his gaze narrowing into something fierce and unforgiving. "Protocol is a guideline, not an excuse," he snapped, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "Treating a legitimate familiguests no less like criminals, especially when you had every reason to know who they were, crosses a line. This isn't just about rules, it's about decency." He turned away from the officer, his boots clicking sharply against the tiled deck as he faced Alex and Maya Rivers. The shift in his demeanor was subtle, but deliberate. His sternness softened, replaced by a grave sincerity. "I'm deeply sorry for what you've gone through," he said, meeting their eyes. "We'll launch an investigation immediately. Those responsible won't escape accountability." This isn't just a matter of police conduct, it's about the integrity of this department, and I won't let it be tarnished. Standing beside Alex, Maya held her ground, her posture rigid, her dark eyes locked on Captain Adams. His apology, polished and formal, slid off her like water off stone. She felt the sting of humiliation still burning in her chest, a raw ache that no words could soothe. An apology doesn't wipe away what we just endured, she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of defiance. This isn't the first time we've faced this kind of treatment, and I'm tired of hearing promises that lead nowhere. I want specific plans, timelines, action. I'm not here for hollow assurances. Her words carried the weight of every sidelong glance, every whispered suspicion she'd endured over the years, and she wasn't about to let this moment slip away without a fight. Captain Adams didn't flinch, his expression carved from granite, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I hear you, ma'am," he replied, his voice measured. "We'll coordinate with internal affairs for a thorough, transparent investigation. I'll oversee it myself. Every officer involved will be questioned, and if there's misconduct, they'll face the full force of the law." He paused, letting his commitment settle between them, a silent vow that he hoped would bridge the chasm of distrust. Alex stood silently beside Maya, his arms crossed, his jaw tight as he studied the captain's face. Years of service in the system had taught him how easily promises could dissolve into bureaucracy, how often justice was a word thrown around without meaning. Now, standing on the other side of that system, wronged, exposed, vulnerable, felt a gnawing uncertainty. Was this man sincere, or was this just another performance? His mind churned, replaying the moment the cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists, the confusion in his children's eyes, the weight of every onlooker's stare. "That's not enough," he said finally, his voice firm, cutting through the humid air. "I need to know this won't be buried. Those officers abused their power, and I won't let it slide. I'm taking this beyond the departmental, the federal level if I have to. This stops here." Captain Adams gave a slow nod, his eyes flickering for just a moment, as if the magnitude of Alex's resolve had struck a chord. "I assure you, we'll handle this with the utmost fairness," he said, his tone steady but tinged with an unspoken acknowledgement of the stakes. "If you have evidence, Statham and Sanathing urge you to share it. We'll work together to see justice done." His words weren't a plea but a recognition. The Rivers family wasn't going to back down, and he wasn't foolish enough to underestimate them. Maya glanced at Alex, a silent exchange passing between them, then turned back to the captain. "We have more than enough evidence," she said, her voice cool and deliberate. "Everything's been recorded by us, by the people around us. If it comes to it, we'll use every second of it. This resort, your department, everyone involved will answer to the law." Her words were a promise, not a threat, delivered with the precision of someone who'd spent years honing her resolve in courtrooms and late-night strategy sessions. Captain Adams didn't argue. He knew the Rivers family wasn't the type to be pacified with platitudes or intimidated by rank. "I'll await your information," he said simply. "In the meantime, I suggest the officers involved report their actions immediately. Thank you for shedding light on this." He turned to the younger officer hovering nearby, his voice dropping to a clipped command. "Landon, get inside. Report everything now." Landon, the rookie who'd snapped the cuffs on Alex without a second thought, stood frozen for a heartbeat. The bravado he'd worn earlier had melted away, leaving behind a young man who looked suddenly small under the weight of his mistake. His eyes darted to Alex, then Maya, then down to the ground as shame crept up his neck in a flush of red. Without a word, he turned and shuffled back toward the hotel, his shoulders hunched, his footsteps heavy with the realization that his actions had unraveled something far bigger than he'd intended. As Captain Adams barked orders for the officers to pull back, the tension around the pool didn't dissipate. It lingered, thick and electric, buzzing in the whispers of the onlookers. Alex and Maya stood side by side, the crowd's eyes still fixed on them, a mix of curiosity and outrage rippling through the air. The filming had stopped, the phones lowered, but the anger hadn't faded. People murmured to each other, their voices a low hum of disbelief and solidarity. For Alex, the weight of it all pressed down on him, relief that the immediate ordeal was over, exhaustion from the fight, and a simmering determination to see it through. He turned to Maya, his voice soft but resolute. "We've won this round," he said, his hand brushing hers. She nodded, her eyes still blazing with purpose. "Yes, but it's just the start. We've got a long road ahead." The crowd around them was silent now, watching, waiting. Among them, their children stood close. Jacob, his brow furrowed with confusion, but his eyes wide with a newfound awe for his parents' strength. And Sophie, clinging to Maya's side. Her tears dried, but her small face still shadowed with fear. Maya knelt down, pulling them both into a fierce embrace, her hands trembling slightly as she stroked Sophie's hair. "We got through this together," she whispered, her voice a lifeline of warmth and steel. "No one's going to treat us like that again, ever." Alex stood over them, his gaze softening as he looked at his family, but beneath that tenderness burned a quiet fire. This wasn't just about them anymore, it was about every family who'd been dismissed, every person who'd felt the sting of power misused. Justice wasn't a gift to be handed down, it was a battle to be fought. As they gathered themselves to leave, the resort manager rushed over, his suit slightly rumpled, his face flushed with panic. "Mr. and Mrs. Rivers," he stammered, wringing his hands, "I'm so sorry for what happened. We never meant for this. We'll take full responsibility. Your stay is on us, and we'll make sure nothing like this happens again." His voice cracked with desperation, but Maya's expression didn't waver. She straightened, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Money doesn't erase what we've been through," she said, her words slicing through his plea. "We don't want your compensation, we want justice. And we'll make sure you face it, too." The manager's shoulders slumped, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for something to say, but he found nothing. He turned away, defeated, knowing their anger was a force he couldn't appease. Maya glanced at Alex, a slight nod passing between them, a signal of their unspoken pact. They had a plan, a purpose, and nothing would shake them from it. As they moved toward the front desk to check out, Jacob tugged at Alex's shirt, his voice small but brimming with questions. "Dad, what happens now? Will everything be okay?" Alex stopped, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. He placed a steady hand on Jacob's shoulder, his smile soft but unyielding. "We're going to fight, Jake," he said. "Everything will be okay because we won't stop. We're going to make things fair, not just for us, but for everyone." Maya stood beside him, her pride shining through as she looked at Alex and their children. "That's right," she added, her voice ringing with certainty. "Those responsible will answer for this, and we won't rest until justice is served." With that, the Rivers family walked out of the resort, hand in hand, their bond forged anew in the fire of adversity. The road ahead loomed long and uncertain, but they weren't alone. Maya's legal mind, Alex's unwavering will, and the fierce love that held them together, they were weapons in a fight that was far from over. The lesson was clear: power abused would face consequences, and justice, though hard won, was worth every step. The rain poured relentlessly over the city, turning the streets into glistening rivers of reflected light. Neon signs flickered in the distance, their colors bleeding into the wet asphalt as the steady drum of water battered everything in sight. Outside an upscale hotel, its grand facade glowing faintly through the downpour, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop. The tinted windows offered no hint of who sat inside, cloaking the vehicle in an air of mystery. When the door finally swung open, Special Agent Maya Thompson emerged, her sharp black suit pristine despite the weather. A discreet earpiece nestled in her ear buzzed faintly with updates from her team. She stepped onto the sidewalk with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had faced the world's chaos and come out on top time and again. Maya was no stranger to high-stakes mission. Sires, as one of the Secret Service's finest, had honed her into a force of nature, a woman whose mere presence could shift the atmosphere of any room. But tonight, in this rain-soaked corner of the city, that authority was about to be tested in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her task was straightforward: secure the perimeter before a high-profile diplomat arrived. It was routine for someone of her caliber, a simple sweep of the area to ensure no threats lingered in the shadows. As she scanned her surroundings, her sharp eyes catching every detail through the haze of Reyna, flicker of red and blue lights pierced the gloom. A police cruiser sat parked a short distance away, its presence unremarkable at first. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped an officer, his broad frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the wet night. Middle-aged, with a stern face etched with lines of weariness and suspicion, he moved with the heavy gait of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. His hand hovered near his holster, a reflex born of instinct rather than reason. As he fixed his gaze on Maya, "Hey, you," his voice sliced through the rain, sharp and accusatory, carrying over the steady patter of drops. What are you doing here?" Maya turned to face him, her movements deliberate and calm. In her hand, she held her credentials, the badge gleaming faintly under the streetlights. "I'm with the Secret Service," she said evenly, her tone professional yet firm. "Here on official business." Inside, though, a familiar weariness stirred. She'd walked this road before with narrowed eyes, the disbelief, the unspoken assumptions that clung to her like the rain soaking her suit. She braced herself for what she knew might come next. The officer didn't even glance at the badge. His eyes stayed locked on her face, his expression hardening into something colder, more hostile. "Secret Service, huh?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "I don't buy it. What's really going on here?" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, as if her very presence in this upscale part of town was an affront to his understanding of the world. Maya's composure didn't waver, though inwardly she sighed a deep, quiet frustration at the predictability of it all. She'd faced this skepticism too many times, the refusal to see her as anything more than an outsider, the dismissal of her authority because it didn't fit the picture some people carried in their heads. "Sir," she said, her voice steady as steel, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back. This is a secured area." But the officer didn't budge. Instead, he took a step closer, his boots splashing in the shallow puddles that pooled on the pavement. His hand moved from hovering near his holster to gripping his radio, his knuckles whitening around it. "You're trespassing," he said, his tone icy and unyielding. "Turn around and put your hands where I can see them." For a fleeting moment, disbelief washed over Maya. Her mind reeled, caught off guard by the absurdity of the situation. "Is he serious?" she thought, her pulse quickening despite her outward calm. Years of training snapped into place, steadying her. She raised her hands slowly, her voice cutting through the tension with unshaken clarity. "Officer, this is a mistake. Look at my badge again." "I said hands up," he bellowed, drawing his weapon in one swift motion. The sleek metal of his gun caught the glow of the streetlights, a stark contrast to the dark. Rain-slicked world around them. The air grew thick with tension, the steady fall of rain amplifying the silence that followed his shout. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the escalating drama hotel guests, passers-by, a few late-night stragglers peering through the downpour. Whispers rippled through them, growing louder as some pulled out their phones, the faint glow of screens illuminating their faces as they recorded the scene unfolding before them. Maya didn't flinch. Her mind raced, calculating every possible outcome with the precision of a seasoned agent. She'd faced armed threats before in battlefields, in shadowy backrooms, during covert operations, but this was different. This wasn't a calculated enemy. It was ignorance wielding power, a volatile mix that could unravel into chaos. She spoke again, her voice loud enough to carry over the crowd's murmurs. "Officer, I am Special Agent Maya Thompson with the United States Secret Service. I am authorized to secure this area for a diplomat's rival. You are making a grave mistake." But the officer, his nameplate reading Grayson in the dim light, wasn't listening. His face twisted, suspicion giving way to something darker, perhaps anger or fear. He stepped closer, his gun still raised, his posture rigid with defiance. "Don't give me that crap," he snapped. "Secret Service, you expect me to believe that, lady? I don't care who you say you are. This isn't your neighborhood. Hands behind your back, now." The words hit her like a slap, though she didn't show it. Your neighborhood. The implication was unmistakable, a jagged shard of prejudice buried in his tone. Maya clenched her jaw, a flicker of anger sparking deep within her. She'd heard it all before with coded language, the hostility, the refusal to see her as anything but a threat. It stung, not because it surprised her, but because it never stopped hurting, no matter how many times she faced it. Still, she wouldn't let him drag this into a spiral of violence. "I'm reaching for my phone," she said clearly. her movements slow and deliberate as she lowered her hands toward her pocket. "I'm calling my superior, who can verify everything I've told you." "Hands behind your back," Grayson barked, his voice rising to a near shout. The crowd gasped, a wave of unease rolling through them. A few voices rose in protest. "What are you doing? She's not the problem here." But Grayson didn't waver. His eyes locked onto hers, daring her to defy him. Maya paused, meeting his gaze with a look that cut deeper than words. "Do you really want to go down this road?" she asked, her voice low but piercing, carrying a weight that seemed to hang in the air. "Because every second of this is being recorded, and it won't look good for you when the truth comes out." For a heartbeat, Grayson hesitated. His eyes flickered, a crack in his bravado as the reality of her words sank in. The crowd, the cameras, the Renit was all bearing witness. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with his free hand. "You think I'm scared of a little recording?" he sneered. "You're resisting arrest, that's all anyone's going to see." Before Maya could respond, the cold bite of steel snapped around her wrists. The crowd erupted, their outrage spilling into shouts. "Stop it," a woman cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "She's Secret Service. You don't even know who you're arresting." A young man near the front, his phone steady in his hands as he filmed, shook his head in disbelief. Another bystander, an older man with a weathered face, muttered under his breath, "This is wrong. This is so damn wrong." Grayson ignored them all, hauling Maya toward his cruiser with a grip that betrayed his simmering frustration. For the first time, a shadow of emotion crossed her face, not fear, not even anger, but a quiet, burning frustration. This wasn't about her pride. It was about the chaos this man was sowing, the unnecessary rift he was carving in a moment that should have been routine. As he yanked open the cruiser's door, Maya's eyes found the young man filming in the crowd. "Keep recording," she said, her voice calm but commanding, a lifeline thrown into the storm. "Don't stop." Then, in a sudden, fluid motion, she leaned close to Grayson's ear and whispered something, words too quiet for the crowd to catch, but sharp enough to make his eyes widen in shock. His body stiffened, his grip faltering for a split second as if she'd struck a nerve he didn't know he had. The onlookers murmured in confusion, craning their necks to understand what had shifted. Whatever she'd said, it rattled him. His pale face betrayed a flicker of doubt, a crack in the wall of his certainty. But instead of releasing her, he seemed to steel himself, shoving her into the back seat with more force than necessary and slamming the door shut. The crowd's shouts grew louder, a chorus of anger and disbelief swelling into the night. Grayson climbed into the driver's seat, his movements jerky, his earlier confidence crumbling into something brittle. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he stared straight ahead, avoiding the rearview mirror where Maya's steady gaze waited. The cruiser's engine roared to life, its sirens piercing the air as it sped off down the slick streets, leaving the crowd behind in the rain. Inside the car, Maya sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Rain streaked down the windows, distorting the city's neon glow into smeared ribbons of light. She'd been in tighter spots than discovered missions gone sideways, threats that loomed larger than one stubborn cop, but this felt different. It was a collision of power and prejudice, a volatile dance that could have ended in blood if she hadn't kept her wits about her. Grayson's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, meeting hers for a fleeting moment before snapping back to the road. His jaw was tight, his breathing uneven. Whatever she'd whispered had lodged itself in his mind, gnawing at him as the cruiser barreled through the night. For Maya, this wasn't just about one reckless officer. It was a stark reminder of the stakes she and her Familieth Rivers clan had faced time and again. They'd stood against injustice not because it was noble, but because it was necessary. Her thoughts drifted to her parents, who'd fought racial profiling with quiet dignity, shielding their children from the worst of it while teaching them to hold their heads high. She thought of her brother, who'd once been cuffed for no reason other than walking home late, his anger simmering for years after. The Rivers family didn't just endure the rose, they spoke. They demanded better. And now, here she was, carrying that legacy into a rain-soaked night where justice hung by a thread. The lesson was clear, etched into every moment of this ordeal. Silence in the face of abuse breeds more abuse. Grayson's actions weren't just a personal failing, they were a symptom of a system, too quick to let power run unchecked. But Maya knew something he didn't yet grasp. The truth couldn't be buried. Not with a dozen phones capturing every second. Not with a crowd willing to shout it from the rooftops. Justice didn't come quietly, it demanded courage, unity, and an unwavering refusal to bow. As the cruiser sped on, Maya's resolve hardened. Whatever came next, she'd face it head-on, not just for herself, but for a world where no one else would have to endure this kind of night. The cruiser hummed along the empty road, its engine a steady growl beneath the weight of an unspoken tension that clung to the air. Like damp fog, Officer Grayson's fingers danced nervously across the steering wheel, a restless rhythm that betrayed the mask of confidence he'd worn just minutes ago. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror where Maya sat, her posture relaxed yet unyielding, a quiet storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. The silence between them stretched thin, taut as a wire ready to snap, until Grayson finally shattered it. "Look," he said, his voice rough with frustration. "If you'd just been straight with me from the start, we wouldn't be in this mess right now." His words were an accusation, sharp and pointed, as if he could shift the blame onto her and ease the gnawing doubt creeping up his spine. Maya tilted her head, her dark eyes catching his in the mirror. One eyebrow arched slightly, a subtle gesture that carried a world of skepticism. She didn't flinch, didn't bristle. Her calm was a fortress, unshaken by his irritation. "The truth," she replied, her tone smooth as polished stone. "I've laid it all out for you, Officer Grayson. I showed you my badge, my credentials, and I've identified myself more times than I care to count. So tell me you had part of that, didn't you believe?" Her words weren't just a question. They were a mirror held up to his unease, reflecting back the cracks in his certainty. Grayson's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles paling under the strain. He flicked his eyes to her again, irritation simmering into something hotter, something uglier. "You don't exactly scream federal agent, all right," he snapped, the words spilling out before he could rein them in. "I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone doesn't fit the mold." The confession hung heavy, laced with an implication he didn't need to spell out. Maya's lips twitched, a flicker of amusement dancing across her face, though her eyes remained cool and piercing. "Doesn't fit the mold," she echoed, leaning forward just enough to make him feel the weight of her gaze. "And what does a Secret Service agent look like to you, Officer Grayson? Go ahead. Paint me a picture." The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of silence spreading through the cruiser. Grayson didn't answer. His hands clenched harder, the leather of the steering wheel creaking under his palms. He didn't need to say it. They both knew the stereotype he'd clung to, the narrow lens through which he'd judged her from the moment he'd spotted her at the Hilton. The engine's low rumble filled the void, punctuated by the occasional static burst from the radio, a lifeline to the outside world that neither of them reached for. Maya leaned back, her mind spinning behind her unruffled facade. She could feel the stakes rising, not just for herself but for the lesson this moment demanded. Grayson's actions weren't just a personal slight, they were a symptom of something deeper, a misuse of power that begged for accountability. Yet she knew rushing him would be a mistake. Patience, she reminded herself, was her sharpest blade. As the precinct loomed into view, its squat brick facade bathed in the harsh glow of sodium lights, the radio crackled to life. A voice sliced through the static, crisp and urgent. "All units, stand by. Possible breach reported near the Hilton Hotel. Secret Service team requesting local assistance." Grayson's hand froze midair, hovering over the receiver as if it might burn him. His eyes darted to the mirror again, meeting Maya's, and for a split second, confusion clouded his features. Maya's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Perfect timing, she thought. A gift dropped straight into her lap. "Secret Service team," Grayson muttered under his breath, the pieces starting to align in his mind like a puzzle he didn't want to solve. His pride, though, was a stubborn wall, refusing to let him admit he might have misjudged her. "You should probably answer that," Maya said, her voice cool and deliberate, cutting through his hesitation like a blade. "Or would you rather explain to your superiors why you're busy detaining one of their agents?" Instead of helping secure a federal site, the challenge was subtle but undeniable, and Grayson's eyes narrowed, his fingers digging into the wheel as if it could anchor him against the tide of doubt, swelling inside him. "Don't think you're gonna scare me with that," he shot back, but his voice trembled at the edges, betraying the bravado he was desperate to cling to. The cruiser lurched to a stop in the precinct parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. Grayson flung his door open and stormed around to the back, yanking Maya's door wide with a force that rattled the frame. He grabbed her arm, pulling her out with a roughness that spoke more of his frustration than any real intent. She didn't resist, stepping out with a grace that only deepened his unease. Inside the station, the air buzzed with the low hum of activitaphones ringing, voices overlapping. The clatter of keyboards bit as Grayson marched Maya through the doors, heads turned. Officers paused mid-conversation, their eyes flicking between the pair with a mix of curiosity and unease. The fluorescent lights overhead cast stark shadows across the linoleum floor, amplifying the tension that trailed them like a shadow. "What's going on here, Grayson?" a voice called out, firm and steady. Sergeant Daniels stepped forward, his broad frame filling the space between two desks. His graying hair caught the light, and his eye sharp. Assessing moved from Grayson to Maya and back again. Grayson straightened, puffing out his chest as if he could reclaim the authority that had been slipping through his fingers since they'd left the hotel. "Caught her trespassing at the Hilton," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "She's claiming she's Secret Service, but I wasn't buying it." Before Daniels could respond, another voice cut through the chatter, sharp and commanding. "But she is Secret Service." The room fell silent, every head swiveling toward the doorway where a tall man in a crisp black suit stood, his presence radiating authority. Special Agent Barnes strode in, his badge glinting under the lights as he held it aloft. "United States Secret Service," he announced, his gaze locking onto Grayson with an intensity that made the officer shrink. "And that woman you've just dragged in here, she's one of my best agents." A collective gasp rippled through the station, the sound swallowed by the heavy silence that followed. All eyes turned to Maya, who stood motionless, her expression now tinged with a quiet satisfaction that felt like victory. Grayson's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling like dry clay, though his jaw clenched tight, unwilling to let go of his defiance. "She wasn't cooperating," he mumbled, the words weak and defensive, barely audible over the hum of the precinct. Barnes stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, frigid tone that sent a shiver through the room. "You're supposed to know, because she identified herself, showed you her badge, and followed every protocol. Instead, you let your own assumptions take the wheel. That's not just a mistake, it's a failure of justice." Maya crossed her arms, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade honed by years of restraint. The cameras outside the Hoteland in the station will back up every word he just said. Grayson's mouth opened, a retort forming, but it died on his lips. For the first time, the gravity of his situation seemed to crash over him, a wave he couldn't outrun. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, and the other officers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between Grayson and the agents. Barnes turned to Daniels, his tone clipped. "Sergeant, I'll need the security footage from the Hilton pulled immediately, along with the station's recordings. Now." Daniels nodded, his face a mask of reluctant acceptance. "Right away, Agent Barnes." Grayson stiffened, panic flashing in his eyes. "Wait a second," he protested, his voice rising in desperation. "This is all a misunderstanding. She was acting shady, people fake badges all the time. How was I supposed to know?" Maya's gaze didn't waver as she stepped forward, her voice steady, but laced with steel. "You're right, people do lie. That's why you're trained to verify before you escalate. I gave you every chance to do that, and you chose to see me as a threat instead. Why do you think that is?" Her words hung there, a challenge not just to Grayson, but to every officer in the room. The younger ones exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable, while the veterans stared at the floor, wrestling with their own thoughts. Grayson's face flushed crimson, but he had no answer known he could voice without digging his hole deeper. Barnes moved closer, his presence towering over Grayson like a storm cloud. Let me break this down for you, officer. You detained a federal agent in full view of the public, ignored her identification, drew your weapon, and cuffed Harold because you decided she didn't look the part. That's not just incompetence. It's a betrayal of the badge you wear. The Secret Service doesn't take kindly to this kind of abuse. The room buzzed with murmurs, the other officers shifting in their boots as the weight of Barnes's words settled over them. Grayson stumbled back a step, sweat beading on his forehead, his bravado evaporating into thin air. "You didn't mean for it to blow up like this," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I thought I was doing my job." Maya's eyebrow arched again, her tone cutting deeper than any reprimand. "If your job is jumping to conclusions based on prejudice, then maybe it's time to rethink your career." Barnes turned back to Daniels, his voice firm. "I'll be filing an official report. This goes to Internal Affairs, and I suggest you place this officer on administrative leave effective immediately." Daniels hesitated, his eyes flicking to Grayson with a mix of pity and frustration, then nodded. "Understood. I'll handle it." Grayson's head snapped up, panic overtaking him. "Admin leave, you can't just." Maya cut him off, her voice calm but unyielding. "They can, and they will. Actions have consequences, Officer Grayson. Maybe next time you'll think before letting your biases call the shots." She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the gathered officers and staff. "This isn't just about one bad call," she said, her voice rising with purpose. "It's about a system that lets these calls keep happening. You all wear that uniform. It's on you to make sure it stands for justice, not power trips. If you see this kind of thing and don't speak up, you're not just bystanders, you're accomplices." The room went still, her words striking like a gavel. Then, from the back, a young officer barely out of the academy, his face still soft with inexperience, spoke up, his voice shaky but firm. "She's right." Heads turned, surprise flickering through the crowd. He squared his shoulders, emboldened. "We've got to be better than this." The ripple spread, nods, murmurs, a shift in the air as discomfort gave way to reflection. Grayson, though, stood frozen, his face a mask of pale fury, his hands trembling at his sides. As Daniels barked orders to retrieve the footage, Barnes turned to Maya, his tone softening. "You okay?" She gave a small nod, her eyes still sharp with resolve. "I'm fine. Just tired of seeing this play out the same way." Barnes sighed, a rare crack in his stoic facade. "You handled it with more grace than most. But we're not done here." Maya's jaw tightened, determination flaring in her chest. "Oh, I know. And I'll make sure it's done right." The station buzzed back to life, officers scattering to their tasks. But the weight of the confrontation lingered, a reminder that justice wasn't just a word, it was a reckoning. For Grayson, it was a bitter pill, one that would haunt him long after the cameras stopped rolling. For Maya, it was a victory, but not a celebration, a call to keep pushing until the lesson stuck. The air in the precinct break room hung heavy, thick with the murmur of strained voices and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Officer Grayson slumped in a rickety chair shoved into the corner, his broad shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world had settled there. His face, drained of color, looked almost ghostly, the ashen hue deepening the shadows under his eyes. His hands pressed hard against his temples, fingers digging into his skull as though he could squeeze out the chaos swirling in his mind. Around him, the station buzzed with quiet activity. Officers shuffled papers, sipped lukewarm coffee, and exchanged whispers that floated toward him like sharp little darts. He couldn't catch the exact words, but the tone sliced through him all the same, each hushed syllable a reminder of the storm he'd unleashed. Across the precinct, in the watch commander's office, a different scene unfolded. Agent Barnes stood tall, his presence steady and unyielding, like an oak rooted deep in the earth. Beside him, Maya leaned casually against the edge of the commander's desk, her posture relaxed, but her eyes blazing with a fire that demanded attention. The room felt smaller with them in it, their authority pressing against the walls. The station sergeant, a weary man with a perpetually furrowed brow, had just returned with the evidence they'd been waiting for. Grainy footage from the cruiser's dash cam and the body cam Grayson had worn during the incident. The tapes sat on the desk like a loaded gun, primed to reveal the truth everyone knew was coming. Maya's voice cut through the tense silence, sharp yet measured. As she addressed the watch commander, "This isn't just about what happened to me," she said, her words deliberate, each one landing with purpose. "It's about drawing a line in the sand. If we let this slit-knife officers like Grayson think they can act without consequence, it's not just a personal failure. It's a crack in the foundation of justice itself." The watch commander, a grizzled man in his late 50s with deep lines etched into his face from years of hard decisions, nodded slowly. His eyes, clouded with exhaustion, met hers with a quiet respect. "I hear you, Agent Thompson," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "What happened out there, it's indefensible. Internal affairs is taking over. They'll dig into this mess and sort it out." Maya crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering, a fortress of resolve. "With all due respect, Commander, I've seen too many promises like that turn to dust. I'm not leaving this to chance. I'm pushing it up the chain, federal oversight." The commander shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under him. He knew the Secret Service's weight could crush any attempt at a cover-up, and the unease flickered across his face before he steadied himself. "You'll have my full cooperation," he said finally, his tone resigned but firm. "Whatever you need." Maya glanced at Barnes, who offered a subtle nod of approval. It was progress, a small victory carved out of a night of chaos. But she wasn't naive enough to relax. She'd fought too many battles where accountability slipped through the cracks like sand. Out in the main precinct, the atmosphere crackled with tension as the internal affairs team reviewed the footage. The clips played on a flickering monitor, images of Grayson outside the Hilton, his stance aggressive, his voice barking over Maya's calm attempts to explain. The body cam audio painted an even uglier picture, her repeated, clear identification as a federal agent drowned out by his belligerent refusal to listen. Officers huddled around the screen, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring in stunned silence as the evidence piled up like bricks in a wall. It was undeniable Grayson hadn't just crossed a line, he'd trampled it. As the review wrapped up, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, stepped forward. She carried herself with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. "Commander," she said, her voice crisp, cutting through the murmurs, "this isn't a gray area. Grayson's conduct was reckless, unprofessional, and outright dangerous. I'm recommending immediate suspension without pay, pending a full investigation." The watch commander's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Do it," he said, his tone heavy with the weight of inevitability. Word spread like wildfire through the precinct. Officers watched, some with wide eyes, as Grayson was escorted from the break room to a smaller office down the hall. His head hung low, his boots dragging against the linoleum floor, each step echoing with defeat. A few of his colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Tably wasn't a frequent visitor here, and its arrival stirred a mix of fear and quiet relief. For some, it was a long overdue reckoning. For others, a warning they couldn't ignore. Maya emerged from the commander's office, her sharp gaze sweeping the room. The whispers died down as she passed, her presence a force that silenced the chatter. She wasn't chasing praise or applause, she didn't need it. But deep down, she hoped this moment might spark something, a flicker of change in the hearts of those who wore the badge. She paused near a desk where a younger officer sat, his hands fidgeting with a pen. He'd been the one to speak up earlier, his voice trembling, but resolute when he'd called out Grayson's actions. Now, he looked up at her, his brown eyes wide with a mix of nerves and awe. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice softening but carrying a steel edge, "for not staying quiet back there." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It didn't sit right. What he did to you," he stammered. "I couldn't just let it go." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "That's where it starts," she told him, one voice refusing to be silent. "That's how you shift the tide." He nodded, a spark of pride lighting his face, though his hands still trembled slightly. As the precinct hummed with restless energy, Maya and Barnes prepared to leave. But before they reached the door, she turned back, her gaze sweeping over the sea of uniforms. Raising her voice just enough to carry, she spoke, her words ringing with quiet power. "Accountability isn't about tearing down one bad apple. It's about protecting what this badge is supposed to stand for. Every one of you has a choice set to rise above, to honor the trust you're given. Don't throw that away." Her message hung in the air, a challenge and a plea, lingering long after she and Barnes stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering under the glow of sodium streetlights. Maya tilted her head back, drawing a deep breath, the cool air washing away some of the night's heaviness. "Think they heard you?" Barnes asked, his voice gruff but warm as they headed toward their car. She smirked, a glint of defiance in her eyes. "If they didn't, they'll feel it when this hits the public. No hiding from that." The thought of the footage with the official recordings and the shaky bystander video spreading far and wide gave her a quiet satisfaction. She didn't crave the spotlight, but she understood its power. People needed to see this, to witness the raw consequences of arrogance and unchecked authority. Justice wasn't just a word, it was a lesson, carved out of moments like these. As they drove off, her mind raced ahead, meetings, follow-ups, the inevitable pushback, but she was ready. This wasn't about her pride or her pain. It was about making sure no one else stood where she had, caught in the crosshairs of a system that too often shielded the wrong people. By morning, the precinct was a hive of activity. News of the incident had leaked like ink into water, spreading across screens and conversations. Officers clustered at their desks, eyes glued to their phones as shaky clips of Grayson's confrontation with Maya looped endlessly online. His raised voice, her steady credentials, ignorant, it was all there, raw and unfiltered, trending under hashtags like Justice for Maya and Accountability. The public's outrage roared through the digital ether, a tidal wave Maya barely glanced at. She sat downtown in a federal office, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and polished wood. Across the conference table, Barnes leaned back in his chair, his expression grim but focused. Beside him sat a legal advisor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, and the division head, a poised woman in her 60s, whose calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp mind. "This isn't just misconduct," Barnes said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the room's tension. "It's a disaster waiting to explode in the department's face. They need to know we're not letting this fade away." Maya nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "It's bigger than optics," she added. "Grayson's actions could have turned deadly. If I hadn't kept my head, if I weren't trained to de-escalate, who knows how far he'd have pushed it." The division head leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. "Your composure was remarkable, Maya," she said, her tone warm but firm. "Most would have snapped under that pressure." Maya shrugged, brushing off the praise. "It wasn't about me holding it together. It was about keeping things from spiraling. Now, we need to hold the line, make sure this doesn't just punish Grayson, but forces the system to look at itself." The legal advisor adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "The footage is airtight, Bias. Protocol violations, unnecessary escalation. It's all there. We'll need a public statement, though, to keep the narrative straight." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't want a media frenzy," she said. "This isn't about me being the face of anything. It's about the cracks in the system. Let's keep the focus there." The division head nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Understood. But like it or not, you're a symbol now. People are watching you, looking for strength." Maya's phone buzzed on the table, a cascade of messages lighting up the screen, support from colleagues, strangers' gratitude, and the predictable venom calling her a traitor to the badge. She'd braced for it, but the sting still lingered, a quiet ache she pushed aside. Back at the precinct, Grayson sat alone in a cramped conference room, the air stale and suffocating. A stack of papers lay before him, the Internal Affairs report, its words cold and final. Suspension without pay, effective immediately, with the Oversight Committee circling like vultures over his career. The door creaked open, and the sergeant stepped in, his face a mask of disappointment. "Grayson," he said, his voice hard, "this isn't just your mess anymore. The whole department's under a microscope because of you." Grayson's scowl deepened, his hands balling into fists. "It was a mistake," he muttered, his voice thick with defiance. "She looked suspicious. I didn't know." The sergeant cut him off, his tone sharp as a blade. "Don't. She showed you her badge. She told you who she was. You ignored it because you couldn't stomach someone like her having that kind of power. You shamed this precinct, and it's time you faced the music." Grayson's jaw locked, his eyes burning, but he had no defense. The truth stared back at him unyielding. That afternoon, Maya and Barnes stood at a press conference. The room a sea of flashing cameras and eager reporters. She adjusted the microphone, her face calm, her voice steady as she began. "I'm Special Agent Maya Thompson. Last night, while securing a diplomat's rival, I was detained by an officer who dismissed my credentials and turned a routine moment into a confrontation. This isn't a one-off, it's a symptom of something deeper, a failure we can't ignore." The room hushed, hanging on her words. This isn't about demonizing every officer. It's about rooting out the Flospia's arrogance, abuse of power that erode trust. Accountability isn't the enemy of law enforcement, it's the bedrock of its integrity. Her voice carried the weight of conviction, a call to justice that echoed beyond the room, a reminder that power unchecked was a wound to us all. The air buzzed with tension as Maya stood at the podium, her heart pounding beneath her composed exterior. She stole a quick glance at Agent Barnes, who stood just off to her side, his steady nod a silent anchor amidst the storm of flashing cameras and eager faces. Turning back to the sea of reporters, she took a deep breath, letting the weight of their anticipation settle over her. "I'm deeply thankful for the incredible wave of support that's come my way," she began, her voice clear and unwavering despite the tremor she felt inside. "But let me be clear, this isn't about me seeking some personal victory or clearing my own name. My fight is bigger than that. It's about making damn sure that no one, whether they wear a uniform or not, ever has to endure the humiliation, the fear, and the betrayal I went through." The press conference unfolded like a tightly choreographed dance, with microphones thrust forward and questions flying at her from every direction. The room hummed with the restless energy of journalists hungry for a story, their pens scratching furiously against notepads. Maya met each inquiry with a quiet strength, her words measured yet sharp, refusing to let the conversation veer into the cheap thrills of tabloid drama. She could feel the eyes of the world on her every syllable she uttered. Was a brushstroke painting the public's perception of this case, and she'd be damned if she let it stray from the truth. This wasn't just about her, it was about justice, about exposing the rot that festers when power goes unchecked. As the session drew to a close, she stepped away from the podium, Agent Barnes falling into step beside her. The weight of the ordeal still pressed down on her shoulders, heavy as ever, but a faint flicker of relief sparked within her chest. She'd lit a match in the darkness. No, it was up to the system to fan it into a flame, or let it gutter out. Outside, the city buzzed with the aftershocks of her words. Clips of her speech ricocheted across television screens and social media feeds, igniting a firestorm of debate that crackled through living rooms and coffee shops alike. Some hailed her as a beacon of courage, a woman who'd stared down injustice with unflinching grace. Others sneered, their voices dripping with venom as they accused her of blowing things out of proportion, of smearing the good name of law enforcement with her sob story. The backlash stung, a bitter wind against her resolve, but Maya had long since steeled herself against it. She'd clawed her way through worse years of sidelong glances, whispered doubts, and outright hostility had forged her into something unbreakable. This was just another hill to climb. That evening, she sank into the worn cushions of her apartment's couch, the soft hum of the city filtering through her window. Her phone glowed in her hand, an endless scroll of comments flickering across the screen, some supportive, others vicious. The familiar ache of frustration gnawed at her, a quiet fury at how quickly people could twist her truth into their own narratives. Then, a message blinked into view, cutting through the noise like a lifeline. It was from her older brother, Malik, his words simple but brimming with pride. "Sis, I'm so damn proud of you. Keep holding their feet to the fire." A faint smile tugged at her lips, warmth blooming in her chest. Malik had always been her raucous, unwavering belief in her, a reminder of why she kept pushing forward, even when the path ahead loomed steep and treacherous. She knew this fight was far from over. The system didn't bend easily, and she wasn't foolish enough to think one press conference could topple decades of entrenched flaws, but it was a start. Meanwhile, across town at the precinct, the fallout was spreading like wildfire. Officer Grayson's suspension had been made official, the announcement dropping like a stone into the tense silence of the bullpen. The grainy footage of his confrontation with Maya barked orders. Her calm defiance had become a grim centerpiece in department-wide training sessions. In a sterile conference room, officers sat stiffly as facilitators dissected the encounter frame by frame, their voices clinical as they pointed out the threads of implicit bias woven into Grayson's actions. The police chief, a woman named Hargrove with steel-gray hair and a gaze that could cut glass, had ordered a sweeping review of training protocols. Decades on the force had taught her that change didn't come from platitudes, it came from tearing down what didn't work and building something better. She stood at the front of one session, her voice low but firm. "We're not here to point fingers. We're here to fix what's broken, starting with how we handle ourselves out there." For Grayson, though, the scrutiny was a personal hell. He sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the glow of his TV casting harsh shadows across his face. The viral clip played on Alufa's own voice roaring back at him, "You're trespassing." Hands behind your back, each replay a punch to the gut. Stripped of the adrenaline that had fueled him that night, the scene looked different. The bystanders' wide eyes, Maya's steady composure despite his aggression, it didn't match the story he'd told himself. The one where he was just a cop doing his job. Now doubt crept in, cold and relentless. Had he been wrong all along? Was there something darker, something uglier lurking beneath his badge? The questions churned in his mind, uncomfortable and persistent, refusing to let him retreat into the certainty he'd once clung to. Maya, meanwhile, was gearing up for the next battle. An invitation had come to speak on a panel about law enforcement reform, a high-stakes event, packed with police brass, civil rights firebrands, and legal scholars. She knew the spotlight would be blinding, but she welcomed it. This was her chance to keep the momentum alive, to force the conversation deeper. When she arrived at the venue, a small knot of protesters greeted her, their signs jagged with slogans like "Support the Blue" and "Stop vilifying cops." Their chants buzzed in her ears as she walked past, her stride unbroken, her gaze fixed ahead. Inside, the room crackled with anticipation, the air thick with the weight of what was at stake. The moderator, a weary man with a voice like gravel, kicked things off without preamble. "Agent Thompson," he said, leaning into his mic, "your experience has ripped the lid off some ugly truths in law enforcement. What's got to change to stop this from happening again?" Maya leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table, her voice cutting through the hum of the room like a blade. "It starts with accountability to bottom. Officers like Grayson can't just walk away from their mistakes. They need to face real consequences. But it's bigger than one man. We've got to dig into the training, the culture of things that let bias fester unchecked. It's not always loud or obvious, but when it's ignored, it tears lives apart." A police rep on the panel, a burly man with a buzz cut and a defensive edge, jumped in. "Hold on, don't you think it's a stretch to tar every cop with the same brush? Most of us are out there busting our asses to do right by people." Maya tilted her head, meeting his gaze evenly. "I don't disagree, most officers are good, honest people. But most doesn't cut it when the exceptions erode trust for everyone. Holding people accountable doesn't undermine good policing, it makes it stronger." The room erupted in applause, the rep shifting in his seat, his reluctant nod a small concession. Back at the precinct, Grayson slouched in a corner of a cramped training room, arms crossed tight over his chest. The facilitator, a weary woman with a knack for cutting through bullshit, flipped on a projector. And there it was again, his face, his voice, his mistake. She broke it down with surgical precision, pointing out every misstep, every assumption he'd made about Maya without evidence. He squirmed, heat rising in his cheeks, but this time he didn't tune it out. Guilt twisted in his gut, sharp and unfamiliar. He'd spent years telling himself he was fair, that he didn't see color or status, just the job. But the tape didn't lie, and neither could he anymore. Why had he dismissed her so fast? Why had he doubled down when she'd given him every chance to back off? The answers loomed, heavy and ugly, and for the first time, he let them in. The panel wrapped with a standing ovation, the crowd's roar washing over Maya as she stepped off the stage. A fragile hope stirred in her. Change was a slow burn, but this felt like progress. Outside, the protesters' voices grew louder, their signs stabbing the air. A man broke from the group, his face weathered and hard, blocking her path. "You think you're helping?" he spat, his tone thick with contempt. All you're doing is making it tougher for cops to do their damn jobs." Maya stopped, meeting his glare with a calm that belied the fire inside her. "I'm not here to make anyone's job harder," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I'm here to make sure every job mine, yours, theirs is done with fairness and respect. If that bothers you, maybe you ought to ask yourself why." He blinked, thrown off balance, but she didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked away, her chin high, the weight of her purpose propelling her forward. The ripples kept spreading. News stations looped her panel remarks alongside the stark footage of her arrest, a study in contrast your poise against Grayson's bluster. Online, the debate raged hotter, splitting the city into camps, those who saw her as a hero, a woman who turned pain into purpose, and those who clung to their distrust of her motives. At the precinct, though, something quieter was brewing. In break rooms and patrol cars, officers started talking halting, awkward conversations about bias, about training, about the unspoken rules they'd all lived by. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. For Grayson, the training had cracked something open. Alone again in his apartment, he pulled up an article about Maya, hesitating before clicking. The headline hit him like a slap: how a Secret Service agent turned racism into a teachable moment. The interview played, her voice steady as she explained why she hadn't lashed out that night. "Anger wouldn't have changed what happened," she said simply. "But showing them I wouldn't break that might." He leaned back, the screen's glow flickering in his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about facing the consequences of your power and what you did with it next. The air in the room felt thick with tension as the incident unfolded. A moment that could have erupted into chaos, but instead simmered into something far more deliberate. She stood there, her heart pounding it from fear, but from a quiet, simmering resolve. Anger pulsed beneath her skin, a natural response to the injustice unfolding before her. Yet she refused to let it take the wheel. She knew that lashing out would only muddy the waters, turning a clear wrong into a messy standoff. Her mind raced, calculating the stakes. Escalation could lead to danger, to a spiral she'd seen too many times before in stories whispered among friends, or splashed across news feeds. No, her aim wasn't to win a shouting match or prove her worth in that fleeting, heated exchange. She wanted something bigger: accountability, a reckoning that would echo long after the dust settled. Safety was her shield, truth her sword, and she wielded both with a steady hand. Across town, Grayson slumped into his worn leather chair, the creak of it barely registering as her words replayed in his mind like a relentless loop. He could still picture her standing there, unshaken, her voice cutting through his defenses without ever rising to a scream. She had every reason to unleash a storm on him, to curse his name, to drag him through the dirt he'd earned. He'd misjudged her, dismissed her, let his own arrogance paint her as less than she was. And yet, she hadn't stooped to his level, hadn't given him the satisfaction of a fight he could twist to justify himself. Instead, she'd turned his failure into a mirror, forcing him to stare at the man he'd become. Guilt had gnawed at him for days, a dull ache he could push aside with excuses. But now, shame crept in, heavy and unfamiliar, settling into his chest like a stone. For the first time, he didn't just regret what he'd done, questioned who he was. Meanwhile, Maya's day carried her far from that memory. Her focus pulled toward a different kind of battle. She stepped into a community center, the hum of chatter greeting her as she crossed the threshold. The room buzzed with energy. Black women gathered in clusters, their faces a mix of curiosity, hope, and guarded skepticism. The non-profit hosting the mentorship event had decked the space with vibrant posters and folding chairs ranged in neat rows. But it was the air of possibility that truly filled the place. Maya felt their eyes on her as she approached the stage, a weight pressing against her shoulders, not of burden, but of duty. These weren't just attendees, they were dreamers, fighters, women searching for a sign that the world wouldn't crush them before they could rise. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped into the spotlight. Her voice carried through the room, firm yet laced with a warmth that drew them in. "I'm not here to sugarcoat anything," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "The path ahead isn't easy. You'll hit walls some you can push through, others that'll feel like mountains. But I'm living proof you can climb them. Not by shrinking, not by folding, but by standing tall and holding fast to who you are. A young woman near the front raised her hand, her braids framing a face set with determination. "Agent Thompson," she asked, her tone sharp with urgency, "how do you deal with people who doubt you just because of how you look?" Maya paused, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "You don't waste your energy proving them right," she replied. "You prove them wrong for yourself. I've had doubters my whole life, shadows trailing me even now. But I didn't let their noise drown me out. My work, my truth, my results, these speak louder than their whispers ever could. And when injustice came knocking, like it did not long ago, I didn't let it shatter me. I turned it into fire, fuel to fight for something better." The room burst into applause, a wave of sound that crashed over her like a tide. Maya's chest tightened, not with pride, but with a fragile, flickering hope. She couldn't rewrite the world in a day, couldn't erase the scars it left on these women or herself. But if her story could light a spark in even one of them, it was a ripple worth sending. Later that evening, as she unlocked the door to her apartment, the quiet of the space enveloped her like a bomb. She'd barely set her keys down when her phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Curiosity nudged her to answer. "Agent Thompson," a hesitant voice crackled through. "This is Maya," she said, her guard up, her tone clipped. A beat of silence stretched before the reply came. "It's Officer Grayson." Her eyebrows shot up, surprise flickering across her face. Grayson, the man who'd stood in her path, who'd let his assumptions blind him. She hadn't expected his voice to find her again, certainly not this soon. "What can I do for you, officer?" she asked, keeping her words measured. Another pause, longer this time, as if he were wrestling with something heavy. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost broken. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For not listening. For doubting you. For letting my own mess cloud what was right in front of me. Seeing the footage, going through training, it's opened my eyes. I was wrong. So wrong. I know words don't fix it, but I had to say it." Maya leaned back in her chair, her expression a mask as she processed his words. An apology from Grayson wasn't on her radar. She hadn't braced herself for this. Part of her wanted to dismiss it, to see it as a hollow gesture born from scrutiny rather than soul. But there was a rawness in his tone, a thread of sincerity she couldn't unhear. She let the silence hang for a moment before responding. "Apologies don't undo damage," she said, her voice steady but not cold. "They're a start, though. What matters is what comes next. Are you ready to face your biases head on, to challenge yourself, your colleagues, to make sure this doesn't happen again?" On the other end, Grayson's breath hitched. A shaky exhale. "Yes," he said, the word trembling but firm. "I don't want to be that guy anymore." She nodded to herself, though he couldn't see it. "Then prove it," she said. "Not to me, but to yourself and to everyone you swore to protect." That call lingered in her mind as she sat in the stillness of her apartment. The city's hum a distant murmur beyond her windows. Trust didn't come easy. Too many apologies dissolved under pressure, crumbling when the spotlight faded. Yet something in Grayson's voice stuck with her, a faint echo of real regret. She wasn't his keeper. His redemption wasn't her burden to carry. But if her stand had cracked open a door to change, even just for him, it was a seed planted on she hoped might grow. At the precinct, Grayson wasn't just wrestling with words, was taking action. The next morning, he stood before his sergeant, the man's weathered face a map of years spent upholding order. Grayson's hands fidgeted at his sides, but his voice held steady. "I want in on the training initiative," he said. "The one on bias and accountability." The sergeant's eyebrow arched. Skepticism etched into his frown. "You're serious about this?" Grayson nodded, his jaw tight. "I've got a lot to unlearn. I need to make this right for me, and for the people I've let down." The sergeant studied him, eyes narrowing as if searching for a crack in his resolve. After a long moment, he sighed. "All right, Grayson, but this isn't a walk in the park. You'll have to face some ugly truths." Grayson met his gaze, unflinching. "I already am." The training room was stark white walls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, rows of officers shifting in their seats. The department's facilitators eyed Grayson with wariness. They'd seen too many cops show up for optics, not change. But he surprised them. He leaned into the discussions, his questions sharp and unguarded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been shaken awake. One session, the facilitator queued up the viral clip the moment Grayson had waved off Maya's badge like it was nothing. The screen froze on his face, taut with disbelief, defiance flickering in his eyes. The room went still, the air thick with unspoken judgment. "Officer Grayson," the facilitator said, turning to him, "What do you see here?" He swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. "I see a guy who let his assumptions run the show," he said, his voice low but clear. "I didn't listen. I didn't check. I didn't trust. And I see what that cost." The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken, until a younger officer piped up, his tone unsteady. "How do you come back from that?" Grayson glanced at the facilitator, who gave a slight nod. "You own it," he said, his words gaining strength. "You look at the mess you made, the hurt you caused, and you work every damn day to be better. You can't wipe it away, but you can make sure it doesn't own you." Across the city, Maya stepped onto a different stage, a law enforcement reform summit, packed with suits and activists, the air crackling with tension. She felt the room shift as she spoke, her voice a steady current cutting through the noise. "Reform isn't about pointing fingers," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's about building a system where mistakes like mine don't fester. Accountability isn't against cops, it's for justice. And justice lifts us all." Her words landed hard, applause rising from some corners while others sat stone-faced. She knew the road ahead was steep, paved with resistance and doubt. But her story was a thread in a larger tapestry, one she'd keep weaving. Back at the precinct, Grayson pored over training notes late into the night, the glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across his face. An email pinged Maya's name in the sender line. His breath caught as he read her words, a quiet acknowledgement of his efforts, a nudge to keep going. He stared at the screen, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Maya, meanwhile, shut her laptop after sending it, the weight of the day settling over her. She'd done her part, lit the match. Now it was up to him, and the system they both navigated, to fan the flame. Justice, she knew, wasn't just punishment, it was the hard, messy work of growth, and its consequences reached far beyond anyone's soul. The journey stretched out before Maya like an endless ribbon of asphalt, cutting through a shadowed wilderness, but she was ready, her heart steady, her resolve unshakable. Every step she took was deliberate, each breath a quiet vow that this moment wouldn't simply dissolve into the clamor of forgotten tales. The pieces of her plan had begun to shift into place, a fragile constellation of hope and determination. What came next would either ignite a flame of enduring transformation or flicker out into the dim recesses of obscurity. Months had unfurled since that fateful day, the incident that had branded itself into her memory, with searing clarity, and yet its echoes still rippled outward, stirring waters far beyond her small corner of the world. The grainy footage of her wrongful arrest, captured by a bystander's trembling hands, had morphed into something monumental, a rallying cry, a cornerstone for those who dared to dream of a reformed law enforcement system. Her response, poised, measured, unflinching, stood as a beacon of strength, a testament to what it meant to face adversity with dignity. Inside her chest, pride mingled with a quiet ache. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but she wouldn't shrink from it either. At the precinct, Officer Grayson's path had taken a turn no one could have predicted, least of all himself. Once a man guided by the unexamined instincts of authority, he now wandered through a maze of self-reflection that had blossomed into something tangibly action. The department's bias training, once a begrudging obligation, had become his crusade. He didn't just complete it, he embraced it, volunteering to guide rookie officers through its lessons. His voice rough with the weight of his own mistakes, he laid bare his story, a cautionary tale carved from the day. He'd let prejudice steer his hands and offered it up like a cracked mirror to his peers. It wasn't a smooth road. The precinct locker room buzzed with snickers and sit-along glances. Some called him weak, a sellout who'd buckled under the glare of public outrage. But Grayson stood firm, his jaw tight, his eyes clear. He'd come to understand a truth that gnawed at him in the quiet hours. Real change demanded sacrifice, discomfort, a willingness to sit with the unease of being seen anew. One crisp afternoon, during a precinct meeting thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken tension. He rose to his feet. The room hushed as he spoke, his voice a low, steady current cutting through the murmur. "I know some of you think this training's a joke," he said, hands clasped tight to keep them from trembling. "I used to agree, but I let my biases call the shots once, and I hurt someone who didn't have it coming. If I can face that and come out better, so can you." Silence swallowed the room, heavy and unbroken, until a few heads dipped in reluctant nods. It wasn't a flood of agreement, but it was a crack in the Dhamma fragile, precious start. Far beyond the precinct's gray walls, Maya's influence had swelled into something vast, uncontainable. What began as a single spark of injustice had fanned into a wildfire of purpose. Invitations poured in, national conferences where her voice carried over rapt audiences, policy reform panels where her insights shaped blueprints for change, even hushed meetings with lawmakers who leaned forward to catch her every word. The demands on her time were relentless, a tide that threatened to pull her under. But she clung fiercely to her North Star, ensuring that the systems meant to shield the vulnerable didn't twist into tools of harm. One evening, as the city hummed outside her window, she sat hunched over a desk littered with notes for yet another speech. The weight of exhaustion pressed against her shoulders, but she pushed it aside, her pen scratching out words that burned with conviction. A soft thud interrupted her focused mail slot clattering as an envelope slid onto the floor. She retrieved it, frowning at the unfamiliar scrawl of her name across the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper unfolded to reveal lines written in a careful, hesitant hand. "Agent Thompson," it began, "I don't know if this will matter to you, but I need to say it. Your strength, your professionalism, the way you held me accountable cracked open the way I see everything, my place in this world. I'm not perfect, and I haven't fixed all my messes, but I'm trying every damn day to be better. You didn't owe me a second chance, but you gave it anyway. I'll spend the rest of my career proving I was worth it. Grayson." Maya's breath caught as she read, her fingers tracing the edges of the page. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, softening the lines of fatigue etched into her face. She hadn't sought his gratitude, hadn't needed his words to validate her fight, but the knowledge that her stand had rippled into his sulet warmed her, a quiet ember of satisfaction glowing in her chest. Time marched on, months stretching into a year, and the Hilton incident name now synonymous with her rest wove itself into a broader tapestry. It became a symbol, a rallying point for those who demanded reform, a stark reminder of accountability's power. Maya's story didn't just endure, it multiplied, inspiring voices in distant towns and crowded cities to rise up, to weave their own threads into the fabric of change. It wasn't merely her resilience that struck a chord, it was her alchemy, her ability to transmute a raw wound of injustice into a clarion call for progress. Back at the precinct, Grayson pressed forward, his transformation unfolding in small, steady acts. Respect didn't come rushing back, it trickled in, earned through the quiet consistency of a man who'd shed his old skin. His colleagues watched him mentor the young officers, his tone patient but firm, his lessons laced with the humility of someone who'd stumbled and risen again. He knew the past couldn't be erased. Every glance at Maya's file in the archives reminded him of that, but he could damn well make sure it didn't repeat. The weight of that promise settled into his bones, a compass guiding every step. On a radiant spring morning, Maya stood atop the wide steps of a federal building, the sun glinting off the polished stone behind her. Before her stretched a sea of young recruits, their uniforms crisp, their eyes bright with the promise of what lay ahead. She gripped the podium, her voice ringing out clear and unshaken. "The badge you wear isn't just a shield of power," she told them, her gaze sweeping over their upturned faces. "It's a pledge to justice, to fairness, to integrity. Never forget, the authority you hold is a privilege, not a birthright. Wield it with care." As her words settled, the air erupted with applause, a wave of sound that crashed over her like a tide. The recruits' faces glowed with awe, with a fire she recognized as the first sparks of purpose. She stepped back, her chest swelling with a fragile, flickering hope. The road stretched on, winding and uncertain, but here, in this moment, she saw the tender shoots of change breaking through the soil. That evening, as dusk painted the city in hues of gold and violet, Maya wandered its streets, her thoughts drifting like leaves on the wind. A familiar silhouette caught her eye. Grayson, perched on a park bench, his broad shoulders hunched as he stared at the ground. He glanced up, meeting her gaze, and offered a small, tentative nod. She paused, her feet rooted to the pavement, then stepped toward him. "Good evening, Officer Grayson," she said, her tone even but warm. He stood, brushing off his jacket, a flicker of respect in his posture. "Agent Thompson," he replied, his voice rough but steady. "Didn't think I'd run into you here." She smiled, a faint curve of her lips. "I could say the same." For a moment, they stood in a stillness heavy with the ghosts of their shared past, words unnecessary yet pressing against the silence. Grayson broke it first, his eyes searching hers. "I meant every word in that letter," he said, the confession spilling out like a long-held breath. "I know," she answered softly, "but change isn't about me believing you. It's about proving it yourself, to the people you're sworn to protect." He nodded, a slow dip of his head, absorbing her words like a man parched for truth. "I'm working on it," he murmured. Maya extended her hand, and he took it, their grip firm, deliberate. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a bridge, a testament to two souls who'd stood on opposite shores of a chasm and found a way to meet in the middle. It wasn't flawless, this progress of theirs, but it was real, tangible as the warmth of his palm against hers. And for Maya, that was enough. The city pulsed around them, alive with the hum of countless lives and in that fleeting exchange. A lesson crystallized. Justice wasn't a gavel strike or a law's decree, it was a daily choice, a fragile thread woven through every act of accountability. Grayson's faltering steps toward redemption, Maya's unyielding stand, they were twin warnings of power's double edge. To wield it carelessly was to court ruin. To temper it with conscience was to forge something enduring. Their story, imperfect and human, whispered a truth that lingered long after the handshake broke. The consequences of abusing authority could ripple far beyond the moment, but so too could the courage to right its wrongs.